Welcome to Wednesday Wanderings. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. It's good to be wandering with you again today on this Wednesday. I wandered off last week on a few days' leave. Wonderful time in the Witzenberg Valley. We were just near Wolseley, close to Ceres and Tulbach. Lots of wonderful wine farms, and did enjoy visiting them, as well as just being in that very, very beautiful valley, and reminded of how wonderful this country is in which we live. There are some outstanding areas of beauty, and do encourage you to take time to just get out. It's good to disconnect and good to explore in these COVID times more locally, with all the more distant travel a bit more difficult, just to really celebrate the beauty that we find close to home. Today, I'd like to reflect briefly around Luke chapter 7, verses 31 to 35, which is the gospel reading for today. Jesus is reflecting on his generation and the fickleness of that generation. And it reminds me a little of a deacon that assisted me in the parish of Nelspruit years ago. We would share morning prayer together, and at the end of the psalm, she would always say, "Nothing's changed." And I must admit that reading this passage, I also think today, nothing's changed. Human beings, we remain fickle in so many different ways. Jesus here just struggling with the almost childishness of his generation. And it speaks about, he quotes, he says, "We played the flute for you and you did not dance. We wailed and you did not weep." He says it's like children sitting in the marketplace and calling that out to one another. And I think so much of what goes on in our social, political context at the moment seems to reflect so much of that. Maybe it's just that we're heading towards local elections here, and just what I'm a bit more aware, perhaps, of that in that context. But just in the greater nature of our world. And I think Jesus, in his own time, was just really noting that wisdom was missing in so many of the ongoing conversations that were taking place. And I think in today's world, I'm very struck as to how, and I think it's the impact of Google and digital connection. There's just so much information out there that gets thrown at us. And whether it's on some of the WhatsApp groups that I'm part of, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, there's just so much there to sift through it, to filter it, is really difficult. There's certain people that I follow because I really do appreciate their perspective and the kind of wisdom that they offer. And so part of the question I think I'm asking today is, are we just sitting in the playground, throwing out mindless comments, perhaps being a little bit vindictive here and there, but not really engaging with the issues of our time, and allowing ourselves to be led astray, to be distracted by the wealth of information out there. One of the biggest challenges is just to really pick up on the sources of information. As I say, there are a few people I trust because they become, I know that they don't put up mindless things. And a number of them I know actually are good at researching where that information comes from. And that's helpful. So, where do we look in the complexity and difficulty of today's times for wisdom, for truth, in a kind of postmodern world where truth often seems to be relative. You have your truth, I have mine, and we kind of get on with things. But how do we find that essence of life that really speaks to what it is to embrace life in its fullness, for ourselves to be, in essence, good people, moral people, to hold good ethical perspectives on what is happening around us in the world and the way we behave, let alone the way other people behave. Obviously, Scripture is an important source for us as people of faith, and the Bible for us as Christians. So a passage like the one today from Luke 7 It's helpful just that it reminds us that actually wisdom, when we draw on it, Jesus says in the last verse, wisdom will be vindicated by all her children. And I know that when I interact with wise people, when I interact with the writings of wise people, increasingly I'm listening to podcasts as well, and being quite specific in who I do listen to, rather than just listening to everything. And sometimes one has to listen to a bit of everything to really discover what's there that really is useful. Many of you may be aware, I've through this period of pandemic, Padraig Ó Tuama has been somebody I've been drawn to, poet, Irish poet and theologian, because there's a real depth to his thinking, and it's not just the kind of everyday stuff we tend to turn out as church, but he really is thinking into the contexts of life, and particularly areas of conflict and difficulty and hurt and heartache, which has been, I guess, for many of us, much of what we've experienced during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so to read his writings and to engage with what Padraig puts out there, for me, has been life-giving, because it touches on the issues that I'm dealing with, that the communities I'm part of are dealing with, and to find little pearls of wisdom that actually just help make sense of what's going on around me has been incredibly life-giving. So where are you going for that? Where you come and wonder with me on Wednesdays, and I hope I'm not leading you off into places that may in fact make that journey for you more difficult. But I value the fact that you do touch base with this on a regular basis. But to encourage you, yes, God is there. And our personal times of prayer, our interaction with scripture, our times with worship and the liturgy that goes with that, those are all sources of just what kind of undergirds our lives, the foundation of who we become increasingly in Jesus Christ, and of course, ultimately then in ourselves, and in the fullness of God and the fullness of creation. So what are your sources of wisdom? Are you just sitting in the marketplace throwing out comments? Or are you finding spaces of some quite deep and thoughtful and creative and life-giving conversation? If you aren't, I really encourage you to do so. If you are, I encourage you to draw others into those conversations as well. God bless.